There we are. Now we're recording. Welcome,
Awesome.
everybody. My name is Meredith White, and welcome to webinar number 2 of the Klett and Flag webinar series 2024. Tonight's topic is making AI work for language teachers. My name is Meredith White. I am in Metro Atlanta, and we are super, super excited to welcome Maureen Lamb tonight. Maureen, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Meredith. Hi, I'm Maureen Lamb. I'm a teacher at the Ethel Walker School. I will introduce myself in a minute, but if you want to access any of these resources that I'm about to go over, please feel free to go to tinyurl.com/lambclettflag24 or use the QR code on this slide. All of the images are basically clickable, so if there's a logo for something, then you can go to it. All right, awesome. So let's get started. My name's Maureen Lamb, and I like to call myself an AI enthusiast. I feel like AI is so new that it's really tough to call myself an expert on it. Don't you have to spend like 10,000 hours on something to be an expert? I'm not quite there yet with generative AI. And so I am an AI enthusiast. I love to learn about AI. I love to do new things with AI. I just use it in my final exams, which we're going to talk about a little bit. But a little bit about me. I am the Dean of Academic Technology and Innovative Pedagogy and the Latin teacher at the Ethel Walker School in Simsbury, Connecticut. I am also a graduate school instructor and a consultant for idioma education and consulting for language teachers. And my specialties include differentiation, accessibility, and academic technology. So this was interesting. I actually asked generative AI to make an image for me of generative AI as a teacher. And I thought this was really interesting because it brought home to me the fact that generative AI is not a replacement for good teaching. It's just not. I mean, look at this. This teacher, there's no students. They're just kind of reading off papers. It's kind of sad that generative AI thinks this is what good teaching looks like, lecturing to something. And so generative AI, in my humble opinion, will not be replacing teaching anytime soon. But that doesn't mean we can't harness the power of generative AI. So let's talk about that. A lot of people I talk to about generative AI tell me I am such a generative AI optimist, and why can't we just ban generative AI and go back to the way things were? Well, guess what? We can't. We can't rewind the tape. We can't kind of have a time machine and go back and prevent it from happening. All we can do is kind of make the best of what we have now. It's not going away. We can't do a Marvel Studios what if and do kind of a redo on the generative AI. It's just not going to happen. And by the way, we've been using generative AI for an awful long time. If anyone here has an Alexa, guess what that uses? Generative AI. If anyone uses our friend Siri on the iPhone, that's generative AI. If you've heard of this wonderful little thing called Google Translate, that is also using generative AI. So this isn't something new, and this isn't something that's going away. Grammarly, sometimes the bane of my existence is it tries to finish all my sentences and emails in ways I wouldn't want it to. But Grammarly is also generative AI and autocorrect, which I also don't enjoy. Um, so many autocorrect fun things that happen. And so this is all generative. This is all based on algorithms that are predictive. And so this is something we've been dealing with for a long time. Turnitin, which I know has had some issues in the past, all using generative AI algorithms to look for things within other papers. So yeah, generative AI is not going away anytime soon. So if we're going to have it anyway, why don't we embrace it and try to make the most of it? And by the way, if we ban it in schools, the kids are just going to walk by to the nearest cafe and use their internet to get generative AI. So banning it in schools also I don't know, sometimes when you tell teenagers to do like not to do something, that makes them want to do it even more. So if you're like, "Oh, generative AI is banned, you can't use it." They're like, "Ooh, I just want to go check it out now." So as much as possible, let's show them how to use it effectively and model that effective use for them. So let's harness the power of AI and make it so that we can help students succeed using AI. And we're going to talk about some of the drawbacks. We're going to talk about some of the good things, some of the bad things, and some of the like not so good things about AI. But overall, we can use it for good. It doesn't mean it's all good and it's all something we should be using, but it can be used for good, which is the point. So how can generative AI work for language teachers? That is our overarching question. And we're going to take a look at some things. Let's first look at what generative AI is and is not. And I like this picture of the brain here because I really think it's important to understand that generative AI is a tool. It's something that should be working with you, not for you. It shouldn't be doing the work for you. You should be able to input something into it and kind of be a co-creator. I was interviewing someone about generative AI, and they said they thought of generative AI as a scene partner in a play or a skit and someone you can bounce ideas off of. And I thought that was really cool. So like a collaboration as opposed to something that does the work for you. And I think that's something that is tempting to have it do the work for you, but then you lose your voice. Then you lose the things that make what you're doing special. And so generative AI is a co-creator. Generative AI works with you, not for you. And so I want to make this really clear. Generative is not creative. Generative is using a bunch of algorithms and then pumping something out. Creative is something that comes from up here. Creative is something that is human. That is something that humans can do. And so it's really important not to kind of confuse the two. Generative AI is generating things. And while there can be an element of creativity in generative AI, the creativity ultimately comes from the human beings making the prompts, not from AI. So that's something to keep in mind. There are the abilities to generate really high quality things with generative AI. You can do pretty high quality text, unlike this lorem ipsum Cicero text, which is not a high quality text, but you can do high quality text with generative AI. You can also make high quality pictures. I asked generative AI to make a picture of generative AI. And they came up with this lovely kind of creepy looking robot. You can also generate high quality videos. Now, it does not usually take into effect the uncanny valley. Sometimes the people look very strange in the generative AI videos. Some are getting better at it, but some of them still look very strange. I was creating pictures for my final exam, and the students were very concerned because it looked like there was a person growing out of another person's back in one of the pictures. It was not my intention, of course, when generating the picture, but it caused quite a few chuckles. So it does have the ability to create something that's high quality. It just depends on the nature of your prompt. The more detailed your prompt, the better quality you're going to get from generative AI. And finally, it's getting better and better at creating high quality sound, high quality speaking, text to speech, and even text to speech that mimics the human voice really well. So that's something that can be really helpful. And all of these things, I think, are going to be most effective in terms of creating accessibility for students, creating differentiated learning, and really creating a more equitable learning experience. So on the whole, I think generative AI can do a lot of really awesome things to help us. And again, generative AI only responds to quality prompts. You can give it a not so quality prompt and you'll get answers, but the more specific details you can give in your prompt, the better. You can also get different generative texts, pictures, etc., by just changing the prompt slightly. My daughter was doing a project on the state of Virginia, and we were using generative AI to get pictures of Virginia. And depending on how she worded the prompt, she was getting tons of different pictures from Canva. And it was really cool because eventually she found exactly what she wanted, but she had to go through that process of course, under parental supervision, changing the prompt to get exactly what she wanted. And it was really interesting to see that, because I think sometimes in this culture, kids are so used to kind of clicking and getting exactly what they want. So the time it takes to reflect and think, okay, this prompt isn't working for some reason. What can I change to make it better? Is actually a really good reflective process for our students. So I think the idea of creating high quality prompts and asking really specific, detailed questions is going to be a trait that our students are going to need in the future. So let's talk about what generative AI isn't. And it isn't the Terminator coming to get everybody, just putting that out there. That's something that I've heard of. People are saying the robots are taking over. That's not what generative AI means. Interesting sci-fi though. It is not a substitute for learning. I remember when the internet was getting really big, I'm dating myself here, in the late 90s, people were saying, oh, well, you just need to know skills. You're never going to have to learn content anymore. Well, I mean, if you don't have the skills to understand the content or some kind of content background, it's kind of a chicken and the egg situation. You do actually need to know some content in order to learn effective skills. So I would say that no, it actually is not a substitute for learning. In fact, it can be a wonderful tool to help with learning, but it should not be considered a substitute for learning. Just like Google Translate will never be a substitute for authentic communication in the target language, a generative AI is not going to be a substitute for people getting an education and learning. I think that that's something that we need to say isn't a thing right away. It's not a substitute for teaching. It can be a remarkable teaching tool. And like I said, I just gave a final exam where I used generative AI, and I used generative AI in a way where my students could do kind of a no pressure interpersonal assessment where they tried the chat bot out, and then they did it on their own as the final one, and they had to name themselves final for the final one. And it was really cool, and they had a lot of fun with it, but they wouldn't have been able to be successful in that chat bot if I hadn't taught them the skills they needed in order to interact with that chatbot. And I think, and I built the chatbot, so both things were true. So you need a teacher to be involved in the process as the guide on the side, as the person who's helping. It's not going to be a question of you can learn everything with generative AI, because there's more to teaching than just kind of spitting out information, as we all know. And also, generative AI is not always reliable for content. I would say it's gotten a lot better, especially in the early days of ChatGPT and generative AI. Generative AI had a lot of hallucinations. So for example, I was doing some research on Joan of Arc, and I asked, oh, please give me 10 books about Joan of Arc to help me with my research. And generative AI wanted to help me out so much that it made up the names and authors of 5 books that didn't exist. And so it was trying to be nice and trying to do what I wanted, but it literally gave me fake information. And so it's really important to know that when you are using generative AI, it's a lot better now. I would say it's upwards of 90% accurate, but you still have to question that information. Just as you would use lateral research for anything you're looking up online, looking up multiple attestations, looking up multiple sources for what you're doing, and you have to do the same thing with generative AI. There are some generative AI tools that allow you to search for things and have the sources right there at your fingertips. And I'll go over what those look like, but not all of them do that, because a lot of them are using algorithms based on a downloaded time of the internet, and they're not doing it in real time. So what they're saying won't necessarily be current news. It won't necessarily be even updated topics. And so it's really important when you're using generative AI, you really take what you're looking at with a grain of salt, and you're conscious of that, and you look for different sources. And I think this is something that's really important for our students to be learning anyway, is don't believe everything you read online, and actually question sources. That's something that I find fascinating. I asked my students the other day, where do they get most of their news? And 90% of the students said they get their news from Instagram and TikTok, which was really interesting. And I said, well, how do you know it's real? And they don't. And that's the thing. And I show them how they can look up different things. And I'm lucky enough that I get to teach digital citizenship, but they have to be looking things up too. And I think that's what we have to think about when we're using something like generative AI too, is where are you getting your information from? Where are the sources? So that's something to keep in mind. So the first thing we're going to go over are just 13 ways that teachers can use this. How can we use it to help us on our classrooms? The first is lesson planning. And I have linked two of my favorite lesson planning tools here. We have Magic School, which had a huge glow up earlier this year. It is fantastic. There's a lot of free things. There's some paid content. Premium's not that expensive. It's pretty cool. And it has great lesson planning abilities by the subject matter, by the grade level, what you're looking for. You can give detailed prompts about what exactly you are looking for. And I love that it is also safe for students to use. So Magic School is something that I think is really, really helpful. Brisk Teaching similarly does a great job with lesson planning. Something I really like about it is if you are a Google school, it can embed right in all your Google Docs and just kind of be there hanging out as something you can use, which is amazing. But both of these are great for lesson planning. Now, just like I'd use any kind of AI, I would caution that when you're using lesson planning, don't just kind of use it and be done with it. Make sure you're reading through it. And again, taking everything with a grain of salt, making sure you're checking things and making sure it's something that works for you. And remember, if you even change the prompt slightly, you might get something entirely different. I remember when I first started using it for Latin, it was giving me very old-fashioned traditional Latin lesson plans. So I had to kind of give it a little more information, and I had to talk about the actual standards, a little bit about how I use comprehensible input. And then it gave me lesson plans that were better for my particular style of teaching, because no two people teach exactly the same way. And so the more information you can give it, the better. The information you don't want to give it, do not give it your personal information, do not give it your name, and do not give it your social security number, just common sense things. You want to give it information that is relevant to what it's doing. Again, when I was doing students for, I really appreciate this about the chatbot Mizu. As soon as my students even tried to ask personal questions, it shut it down and alerted the teacher on the thing. So I was like, yes, thank you so much for doing that. Because as soon as that line is crossed, that's bad. So again, don't share personal information when doing this. Grading. Again, I would take this with a grain of salt always, but these are two that can be used for grading, especially grading with rubrics. I know a lot of us language teachers do use a lot of rubrics as we're going through things, and it's just nice to have kind of a co-creator for a rubric. Rubrics used to take me hours and hours and hours. Now using things like Smoden or Gradescope, or usually I just use ChatGPT too, to create a rubric can be extremely helpful. Again, the more detail I can give about the assignment, the better off I'm going to be. And so this can help me create a really effective rubric for my students. I've done playing around with my own things that I write models for students when I do assessments, and I put in the rubric and see how ChatGPT might grade it. And it's come out and it's been actually pretty accurate. But again, I would caution that it's probably better to have it co-create rubrics and co-create that. And if you are doing grading with this, always make sure you check it, because you want it to reflect what you are grading as a teacher, not just whatever it comes up with. Just always make sure you're checking things. It can help save time though, which I love. For bibliographies and real-time information, Perplexity has been my favorite for a very long time. Perplexity allows you to look things up, and then it will give you the sources. It will tell you where on the internet it got that information. And that is so helpful for my students. My students were doing a research project earlier this year. A bunch of them were using Perplexity. Another great thing about Perplexity is you don't have to sign in. So your students don't have to share any of their information. They just get to look stuff up, and then they can delete it too, which is fantastic, because sometimes when you're logging into a site like ChatGPT, you're giving your information and then they're taking any searches you do and putting them into all the algorithms. So the more you put into ChatGPT, that all kind of goes into the ChatGPT system. But with something like Perplexity, you can delete it, which is fantastic. And I think that can be really helpful, and it can put your mind at ease when if you're having students use it for things as well. The citation machine, which is a Chegg service, also really helps with bibliographies and helps with more up-to-date resources. And this is something that just takes a long time. So this can be helpful, again, to save time and help teachers when they're doing things like research. So question generation. Conquer's something I've been using for quite a while. I got to beta test it a couple of years ago. It's really good now for questions. It got so much better in the last even few months. And I think it's really effective too because it can do multiple languages. And I played around with it for Latin. I played around with it a bit for Spanish, and it does a pretty decent job. And you can pick the different question types, which I think is really good. Yippity too has even a lot more languages, and Yippity also does question generation. Now, I think that sometimes as teachers, we just have so much going on. Sometimes we're teaching a lot of different classes and we just want different questions generated. Or maybe we're doing things like, I don't know, giving reassessments. I know that as part of grading for equity at my school, we give reassessments. And so if I can take the same material and have different questions generated so that I can give a reassessment quickly and easily to students, everybody benefits. I save time, the student gets the reassessment, and it just makes it easier for everybody. So using a tool like this would be great. And just making sure that, again, I'm checking everything as I go through it before I give it to the students. So image creation. I am not the world's best artist, as I'm told by my 7 and 10-year-old all the time. And so when I'm creating images for things, I actually love using image creation, especially Canva Magic Studio, to create images. For my final exams, I created a bunch of images using the Canva Magic Studio, and it was really cool. It was really quick and effective, and as soon as I kind of detailed the prompt differently, I got exactly what I was looking for. So again, it can take some trial and error, but it's something that can be really helpful. And Canva is actually free for K through 12 educators. So if you sign up for the Canva educator account, it's really worth your while. You can actually access DALL-E, which is kind of the gold standard right now of image generation, for free with your K through 12 account. So that's something to keep in mind. Also, you can use something like stock image AI. Now that has, I think you can hit a certain number free, and then it's a paid account. But if you're not a Canva school, if you can't use Canva for whatever reason, that's another really good option to find exactly what you're looking for. And just as it suggests, it's taking different stock images and trying to look through and find exactly what you want for whatever prompt you're doing. So it's more specific than something like a Google image search, but it's something that can help you find exactly what you're looking for. One of the big things that I've seen with students is the ability to create study resources and flashcards super fast using generative AI. I've been using Quizlet for a really long time now, and oh gosh, over 10 years. And Magic Notes is brilliant. It is so cool, and my students use it. I use it to create study sets. I just upload my notes, and it gives me a card set on my notes. It also gives me questions about the notes and even a summary of my notes. So it takes those notes and it creates lots of different materials where I can create it and have students engage with it outside of class. It's great for personalized learning because I actually give a homework playlist, and it's students kind of choose their own adventure for their homework. And so giving something like this, where I've created a study set, I've created some questions about the set, and I've added it to Quizlet Classroom, and they can kind of go in and take a look at it. That's been really, really helpful for students. So the Quizlet Magic Notes is fantastic. They really love that. If you can't do Quizlet for whatever reason, another really good option for this is, oh, whoops, I went forward by accident there, sorry. Hold on one second. I'm just trying to see this, is paper clips. So paper clips is another option you can use where you can copy and paste whatever notes you have, and it will start to generate flashcards and questions for you. So that's a great option. Again, teachers can create them really quickly and easily, and then students benefit with the opportunity to review. So it's really helpful. AI tutors, again, not replacing teachers by any means, but there's something where students can review. Q Chat from Quizlet, I actually really, really like because there are different ways that students can review. I actually recommended my students look at this for their final exams this year, and they really liked it. And so you pick a Quizlet set and you just ask questions of the set. So it's almost like an Ask My PDF or something, but instead of using a PDF, you're using a Quizlet set. And it has some additional information as well. And I really like that it works for Latin because not everything works for Latin. Something that works really well for other languages, but not for Latin, is Play-Doh. Play-Doh is a paid service, but it's something that, again, has that interaction, that AI tutor back and forth with students. And this could be in the target language. This could be about the target language, about a text of the target language. There's a lot of different things it can do. So these are great options, again, for students to do personalized learning opportunities. And it is that time of year. We're getting to the end of the year. And I don't know about you, but I'm writing a lot of recommendation letters. I'm also writing a lot of student comments. And while I would always caution to please make sure you're adding specific anecdotal information about students when you're writing any of these, you can come up with a comment template. And that's something that I've used over the years. Magic School has some great ideas for this, but you could just enter it in as a prompt in ChatGPT as well. And what I like to do in my comments is make sure I'm addressing what skills my students have acquired over the year. So thinking about their interpretive skills, presentational skills, and interpersonal skills, and how they demonstrated that within the classroom. And so coming up with different comment templates where I can kind of plug things into it based on the student can be really helpful and save me time. Another thing I like to do is actually put my comments in after I'm already done so that it will edit it for me. That is so brilliant. Or a letter of recommendation. Let's say I just need it to edit and I need to turn it in. I can just put it in ChatGPT and ask it to edit this for grammatical or spelling or just different mistakes, and it will give me suggestions, or it will actually rewrite it for me. It's great. It's really quick. It's really easy, and it saves me time. And I think that's something, time is what is most at a premium for teachers. So the more time we can get back, the better. Story and prompt creation. I know as a teacher who teaches Latin, there are some wonderful Latin stories out there, but sometimes they're not on the subjects my students want to learn about. One day I made a story about a sad cow who was looking for flowers. It was kind of like Ferdinand the Bull, but they wanted it in Latin. And so I could go into something like the Canva story creator or ChatGPT and say, please write a story in Latin about a sad bull looking for flowers using 20 unique Latin words at the novice level in the present tense. But again, the more specific details you can give it, the better. Sometimes I've even done story creation where I will list out, here are the vocabulary words that I want you to use for this story, because they can do it with that kind of specificity. And again, you want to look this over. You want to make sure that this is what your students want to see. But this is also something that can really help save time. I can't tell you the number of hours I've spent and continue to spend just writing stories in Latin. And I do it because it's fun, but sometimes you need something quick and you need something done. And so having an opportunity to use something like this is incredibly powerful. Tables and charts. So this could be tables or charts used for infographics. This could be tables and charts used just for collating your own data. But ChatGPT is awesome for this. It's gotten so much better. And there's also ChartGPT if you wanted something a little more high end. But it's something you can do. Infographics, ChatGPT doesn't do great with. Charts and tables, it can do pretty well. So it's something that you can do, and it's something that when you can visually represent data or represent data in a way that makes sense, it can be really helpful for the classroom. Summaries or explanations. The one I referred to earlier, Ask My PDF. That's something that my students have found, and it's something that I've found to be really helpful. I wish I had it in grad school and I could just put a PDF of all the research books I had so I could go look up that reference. Because when you're looking for that, like, I know I read that phrase somewhere, you could actually look that up in Ask My PDF, which is fantastic. Another thing I love is Adify. I know there's a lot of different YouTube summaries out there, but Adify is great. It does a whole transcript of the YouTube video. It gives you different points within the video with timestamps. And I'm going to talk about an app smash you can use with it later. But suffice to say, it's a great tool if you want to do summaries of YouTube videos, transcripts of YouTube videos. I think it's really helpful too as an accessibility thing to be able to have transcripts of videos for students who want to read along and want to have captions for a video. I think that can be really, really helpful. And it doesn't make you sit there and write out all the captions yourself, which is something that I bet some of us have done before. And so it's really nice to have that as an option. So video editing, I know some of us make videos, some of us have flipped classroom models, and editing videos can take a really long time. Two really good video editing platforms are Filmora and Synthesia. Both of them have paid and trial options, but it's something you can use to make your videos a little more high-end, a little more kind of professional looking, and using AI to help you do it. And finally, one of the things, and I'm going to say last but not least, because I actually think it's one of the most important things that generative AI can do, is create opportunities for differentiation, create opportunities for choice, create opportunities for students to do more personalized learning. It's something that you can do with AI that would take an awful long time if you tried to do it without AI. And even getting ideas from AI, even if you don't use every one of them, can be extremely helpful. I know sometimes I am at the end of the year and just trying to find creative, interesting ideas to help keep students engaged. And tools like Magic School and Diffit can help with whatever you're doing to try to come up with the more of those engaging and compelling ideas for students. So I'm going to take a quick break as we look at these other useful AI generators for teachers. Does anyone have any questions on those first 13 recommendations?
If it helps, I think we are all caught up in the chat. And I am also currently putting all of the links of everything you mentioned into the Wakelet page. So we've got them linked on your slides, but then we
Amazing.
also have them linked there too. So they're everywhere. And these
Thank
are
you.
amazing, by the way. Oh,
Awesome. Thank you.
absolutely.
I put a bunch of different things here. This is just kind of like a little brain break of other useful AI generators. I'm gonna just note number 9 here, Chef GPT. I don't know if anyone else gets like this, but you get home from a long day of work and you're just like, I want something to jump out of my fridge at me and make itself. Well, Chef GPT is kind of like that because you just put whatever ingredients you have in your house and it comes up with meal ideas. So it's like, whoa, that's awesome. So I don't have to think because sometimes it's just like the mental load of the day makes you not want to think about that. So highly recommend Chef GPT for that, for busy teachers everywhere. All right, so next we're going to talk about how we can specifically use AI in our language lessons. All right, so we've got all the interpretive reading tasks. As a Latin teacher, we do interpretive reading all the time, all over the place. Interpretive reading is kind of our jam. And so one of the great things you can do that I already alluded to is generate a story using sheltered vocabulary or only a specific list of words in the target language. One of the great things about this is you can tailor it to your students. So again, saving a ton of time. Should you not look at it after you do it? No, you should absolutely read through it. You should make sure it works for you. And you should replace any vocabulary words that your students do not know with words that they do know. However, it can save you a ton of time. So it's really helpful. You can also generate a list of events that happened in the story in the target language. And just if you want a quick kinesthetic warm up, cut them out, put them all jumbled up, put them in an envelope, and give them to different groups of students as they walk in the room and make them put them in order. It is so easy and quick, and all you have to do is put in the story and it will generate that for you. Text to speech in the target language is something that is super duper helpful. I put a couple of different things in here. Murph AI is the best speaking platform that I have found. The voices sound the most authentic, like a human voice, like not as robot-y as some other platforms. And so I would highly recommend checking out Murph AI. They sadly do not have Latin, but there are some places that do have Latin. So that's what I work on. But Murph AI has almost every other language. and also the translation of text to the target language. We've already seen tools like um, Google Translate that do this really well, but AI has come a long way since the beginning of Google Translate. I remember it often showed me Latin is French in the very beginning. And so Google Translate and tools like it have come a long way in helping with the translation of text to target language, which can be very accessible, especially for our ESL students. We also have a lot of interpretive watching and listening tasks. And here's the app smash I alluded to earlier. You could create questions using Adify and all its lovely timestamps and its transcripts, and then put those questions in Edpuzzle. So then you could use two great kid-friendly apps there. Something that I have used that is a game changer is Zoom AI for meetings, notes. Oh my gosh, it's so helpful. Even when I'm meeting with a student, if I have to meet with a student on Zoom for whatever reason, making sure I have a summary, a transcript, if I'm meeting with a colleague, it just makes life easier to have all of that. So it's not a vague, amorphous, like, oh yeah, we talked about this. Like, no, here's the actual transcript and summary of what we talked about. And if you're doing, let's say you have a transcript of something from either Adify or whatever you're using, you could then use your transcript to create questions for a podcast, have students respond to something that they listen to, create their own things, and then use the fun editing tools that AI offers because it's a great way for them to kind of experiment with it. Again, I would caution whenever you're researching an AI tool, make sure it is appropriate for whatever age it is. For example, Google Gemini is 18 plus because its algorithm is not sheltered against content that is 18 plus. There are other things that are 13 plus. I think Canva is technically 13 plus, but teachers can give permission. There's a couple of other ones that are 13 plus, just like most social media is 13 plus or 18 plus. So that's something to keep in mind. Keep in mind the age of your students as you're using AI with your students, if you are, and also keep in mind what tools are appropriate and what tools are not appropriate to be using. Google Gemini can get a little wild. So just be aware that their algorithms are definitely 18 plus. So keep that in mind. Interpersonal tasks. I find that I don't know if this is true for all students, but a lot of my students have a lot of trepidation when it comes to interpersonal tasks. It just feels more vulnerable when you have to do something extemporaneously. When they can prepare, they feel a bit more confident. And so it's really cool to have options for students to use AI generators to give them that confidence boost. And so having a conversation with that AI generator in the target language, using a text generated get a dialogue between characters in the target language, and then have students complete that dialogue, or maybe read an article in the target language and then have it generate debate questions in the target language. These are all things that I've done this year with generative AI, which is really fun. And as I was alluding to earlier, I used Mizu on my final this year, which was really cool. Students were loving using the chatbot, and Mizu shut that down if they were trying to share any personal information. I appreciate that so much. So I felt really safe using it because I could monitor my students. I could actually read their chat after the fact. And Musi was giving information too. And the cool thing for me as a Latin teacher is you could do it in Latin, which was amazing and so much fun for my students. They could both type the Latin, listen to the Latin. Some of them even attempted speaking the Latin. That still needs some tweaking, but they had a lot of fun playing with it. And I think that just giving students the opportunity to see what something like generative AI speaking and texting could do was really cool. My students asked already if they could do more with it next year. So presentational tasks are something, again, it's really important, I think, when students are doing presentational tasks to make sure there's a strong feedback loop. You want to make sure that when students are doing a presentational task, this is something that is polished, this is something they've been working on, and this is something they've had some feedback on. And so there are a bunch of tools now that can give feedback. For writing feedback, I still actually use ChatGPT most of the time. So if I were to do a presentational writing task, I might copy and paste it and say, hey, ChatGPT, please edit this for grammatical mistakes or spelling errors or what have you. But a really cool tool that's out there, it had a waiting list. I don't know if the waiting list is off, is Udly. Now, Udly is used by Toastmasters. It actually looks at your, you present to the screen and it gives you feedback about what you're doing when you present. How many times are you moving? Are you saying extraneous words? I know from playing around with it that my extraneous word is so. Uh, and it's interesting. It gives you that direct feedback and it's so very helpful. And so I would see there's that word again. I would recommend playing around with it if you can get off the waiting list because I think it's something that can be incredibly helpful for students because they're getting feedback from someone that's not necessarily their teacher and it's kind of a low stakes thing for them. They can get that feedback, they can apply it to their presentation and do it just that much better. Or if you're doing investigative tasks or research, you can generate a list of papers to research in and about the target language, and you can generate links to real-time articles. Again, my friend Perplexity is awesome at this. This is something I've been using with students with research all year. It's not necessarily kind of Google Scholar level and giving scholarly articles, but it does give leads to places that are real on the internet. It gives you the sources and you can go to those websites. So it allows students to do the really important task of making sure they have multiple sources for something and that they're doing lateral reading about a topic. So let's talk about the big elephant in the room that I keep hearing about. What about generative AI and cheating? This is a big thing right now. And I think that this is going to sound terribly optimistic of me, but a lot of it is mindset. I think one of the reasons students are cheating is because they're feeling overwhelmed. One of the reasons that students are cheating is because they don't feel like their work is good enough. And maybe they don't have confidence in the power of their own voice. And I feel like that needs to be a culture shift. I've seen that kind of lack of confidence. It was happening before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic even made that kind of go down even further. So I think that in order to prevent students from allowing, and this is what I tell my students, you're allowing generative AI to speak for you if you don't use it appropriately. I want to hear their voices. I want to hear what they have to say because that is important and meaningful. And again, I know I sound very optimistic right now, but I believe that that kind of culture shift could really switch around the mindset of generative AI and teaching and cheating right now. And remember when Google Translate came out and we were all told, oh, kids are always going to be using Google Translate to cheat. And guess what? That doesn't happen all the time. You know why? Because it doesn't. And a lot of our students generally want to learn a language. They're in it for the communication. They're in it because they want to learn. Do students use Google Translate still? Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's for very much the same reasons that they're using generative AI. A lack of confidence, a lack of time, feeling overwhelmed, feeling like they can't do as good a job with something. And so I say, let's address those issues and then see what happens with the cheating thing. Now, I will give you some resources if you need to detect AI, because I know that sometimes students will use AI, pass it off as their own. One thing I would recommend is if students are doing a written work with you, have them share a Google Doc or whatever kind of shared document you're using so that then you can go in and view the version history. Because if all of a sudden their paper appears all at once magically during 1 minute, you know something's up, and that is a red flag, and you can go talk to them about it. It also is another argument for doing things in chunks, but I'll get to that in a minute. Winston AI is currently probably the best one out there when it comes to detecting AI. Copy leaks and GPT-0 are also good tools, but I wouldn't say they're as accurate right now as Winston AI. Something my students were telling me that kids were doing, not necessarily at their school, but perhaps at other schools, was actually telling AI, make this undetectable by AI detectors, which is fascinating and really kind of brilliant of them. But I do know that Winston AI is alerted to that, and that's something that it's been working on. But it's something to keep in mind is looking for AI can be really interesting because a lot of times AI does not sound like it has a strong voice. And I know that when students are first learning things, sometimes they don't have as strong a voice. So the temptation to use something can be a little bit bigger. So the more we can give students feedback, the more we can have them turn in little things throughout a process, the better off we're going to be. Here is something that is a big game changer for AI cheating. When students are feeling overwhelmed, if you can, give them a flexible deadline. I really appreciate that my school gives students a 4-day extension or grace period so that if they need time, they can take that 4 days. They fill out a form, they get approved, and they take those 4 days. Because if they're feeling overwhelmed, of course, they're going to feel compelled to do something and turn something in. But if you give them the time to do their own work, that's really what they need to succeed. Frequent formative feedback. Yes, I really like alliteration. Um, the more you can give feedback throughout an assignment at every stage of an assignment, the better off you're going to be. I actually use formative when I'm giving assessments. So I'm giving students feedback while they're taking a test using the comments on formative, which is so awesome. But the more you can give students feedback, the better off you're going to be. And I know that can sound impossible when you have so many students, but even doing little like thumbs up on things or an emoji here or there, really just making sure they know you saw their work can go a long way to them not feeling like they need to do something like use generative AI. I know it sounds corny and I know it sounds really optimistic, but it's something that can really help along the way. Student agency. I have found that the more that I can incorporate student choice into assignments, the more students are likely to both do the assignment and to do their own work on the assignment because they feel like they own that. That is their work. That is something they are proud of. That is something they chose to do. And so the more we can incorporate student agency, I think the more we're going to prevent students feeling like they're forced to do something and then they don't want to do it, or they're overwhelmed by things and then they end up doing the cheating thing. Okay, so I'm going to go through my top takeaways and then I'm going to take any questions. So if you heard nothing else tonight about generative AI, here are some good takeaways. Model behavior for students. If you're using generative AI, tell them about it. Like, hey, I used generative AI for these pictures. What do you think? Or I used Canva for this and I used generative AI, and model how you should use generative AI appropriately for students and tell them how they shouldn't. Both things are true. Both give them that good model and then encourage them not to share personal information with Snapchat's AI, please, because that is no good. They should not be doing that. And so I have these conversations all the time with teachers and students about not sharing information. So let's model good behavior on this. Students need to believe in the power of their own voice. That's the long and the short of it. As we need to help students by challenging them and giving them the confidence that we do want to hear their voice. Could we use generative AI to do things? Of course we could. But you know what? I know Latin. I want to see what my students know in Latin. And that's what I want to hear their voice. I want to see how they're progressing. And I think using things like rubrics and giving frequent formative feedback are both ways that students can keep track of their own progress and feel more agency about their work. And so the more we can get students to believe in the power of their voices and that their voices are important and matter, and that's what they should be using, the better off we're going to be. Asking detailed questions, especially around prompts, detailed questions that allow you to reflect and change things is going to be a really, really important skill as these students are entering the job market because AI isn't going away. And so when we're thinking about future skills for students, the ability to ask detailed questions and then to reflect on why questions aren't giving us the outcomes we're looking for and change that question to give the outcomes we're looking for is going to be an incredibly powerful skill that's necessary. And this, I believe wholeheartedly, again, ever the optimist, creativity is our superpower. Generative AI can be our partner in crime, can be our co-conspirator with this, but you know what? If we're collaborating with it, we are the ones providing that creative input. And I think that it's important to remember that creativity continues to be our human superpower. And here's my contact information. Here is again links to the presentation. Please feel free to reach out if you have questions about a specific tool. If you have more questions about generative AI in general, I am super happy to help out. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Oh, this fantastic per usual. And I so appreciate the categories. Like I just love anything. I love all of the tips and all the tools. And I was like typing like a crazy person just to get them all in there. So I think I got them all. But I appreciate your slide sharing and just the categories, because I think that's something that can be really confusing or feel really overwhelming, is so many of them. And I think we talked about this
Yeah.
on the Wayside podcast episode, but like they can all feel like they do so many similar overlapping
Mhm.
things. Plus you've got a curriculum, plus you maybe hopefully, you know, or some kind of
Yeah.
direction, plus you've got all these things to do, and it's like, which one do I use? So I super appreciate that you separated them into like, well, what do you want to do, like into like function. Super helpful.
Oh, I'm so glad. That's probably the number one people ask. They're like, "Oh, what's the tool you use?" And
Hmm.
it's like, "Wait, for what?" Because you really have,
Right,
a lot
right.
of times you're using different tools for different things. But
Hmm.
as you're starting out with generative AI, I would recommend pick 3 or 4 things that you want to work
Yeah.
on with generative AI. Don't overwhelm yourself by trying to do all the things. Even I'm talking about doing this now, and I would say that when I'm going through these things, I'm using ChatGPT a lot. I'm using
Mhm.
Perplexity a lot. I'm using Canva a lot. There's some Quizlet. I'm using some every day, and some I'm using, maybe once a week, maybe once a month, depending
Yeah.
on what I'm doing. But I just want to make sure people should feel comfortable and familiar with what they're using. So they should
Mhm.
explore, see what works for them, and just use what works for you and your students. That's the long and
Yeah.
short, just like any technology tool.
I was gonna say, really, just like any tool. Like we don't
Yeah.
walk into somebody's house and go, "Wow, Maureen, this is beautiful. What do you use to clean?" Like, what do you mean? You know, like talking floors? Are you talking windows? Are you talking surfaces? Like, are you talking? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
we don't. Like, I own a Kia. I wouldn't expect myself to therefore be an expert on a Honda or a Chevy. You know, like
Right.
I have what I like. It works for my
Right.
purposes. And so, you know, treating it kind of like we do the other things in our lives, and yeah, not letting it kind of overwhelm or be like, oh, never mind. And we, you know, don't try any of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where, or a lot of people go to ChatGPT and they're like, oh, wow, this is overwhelming.
Yeah.
But what's really nice is how a lot of these are now very targeted. And
Mhm.
when I go into something like Diffit or Magic School, it is so easy to find exactly what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Whereas something like ChatGPT, it has those resources, but they're really available on premium. So when you're getting the basic system,
Right.
you're creating all those prompts. What the tools are really doing is they're kind of pre-creating those prompts so that when you're going in there, it already has some kind of constraints to what's
Right.
being in the
Right.
algorithm. So
And you have to know like what you're doing, because it can
yeah.
be, I've watched some people be overwhelmed by ChatGPT, and
Oh,
I've
sure.
also watched people be underwhelmed by
Yeah.
ChatGPT. They
It,
open it up and
yeah.
they're like, okay, you know, like what do I do now? And it is kind of like, oh yeah, it's kind of just staring at like a blank sheet of paper. So
Yeah.
it, you know, it's nice to have some kind of teacher and student, like some teaching and learning focused ones that say
Uh-huh.
like you mentioned, with what's a couple, well, Magic School does, a couple of them do it, where it's like, what about, okay, that was a great prompt you made there, would you like to do the following things next? Like it kind of guides you a little bit,
Oh, yeah.
which
That's really good.
um yeah,
He does
super
that
helpful.
too.
Hmm.
So helpful. It's
I'm
like, well,
like, yes, yes, I
yeah,
would.
of course I would. That's great.
You know I would.
It's already in there, which is fantastic because you're like, oh,
Right.
whoever with these algorithms knows teachers
Uh-huh.
well, which is
I'm
great.
here for it. Right.
Yeah.
I'm like, thank you so much.
And
Yes.
honestly, anything that can save us time and
Yeah.
kind of center the student experience more, because I think generative AI does both things. It helps
Yeah.
teachers to save time, and it also helps students to have more differentiated, personalized learning experiences. So in
Yeah.
my book, generative AI is a good thing. It's not Terminator. It's actually going to be very
Yeah.
helpful forward.
Absolutely. Well, and kind of, one of those things too, like I'm a paper and pencil in class writing person
Mhm.
for so many things, a quick write, a quick paragraph, an exit
Yeah.
card, like all these different things. So, we always have that too. Like there are some people that are like, well, how am I gonna know? And it's like I can't help but think that world language teachers have a little bit of an edge on other content areas. Cause like you said at the beginning, we have been playing the is it Google Translate or is it not Google Translate
Yeah.
for years, And so now that other content areas are catching up, they're all like, what do we do? I'm like,
Right. I know.
like,
It honestly does feel like that sometimes.
oh, right. Exactly.
We've been dealing with this. We got it. Yeah.
I'm like, just ask your language teachers because yeah, like we've been dealing with the kid who said me llamo S 2 days ago and now is using like the pluscuamperfect. And you're like, that's amazing, Don Quixote. That's amazing. Like, who talks like that? Nobody. So it's just really funny. Like we are so used to it,
Yeah.
but and not to make light of like other content area teacher
No,
kind
no.
of plight, but it is fascinating to watch and go, gosh, we like in world language really we have had to really be aware of a lot of things and we've
Sure.
had to really like keep trying tools because we've always got to keep the language
Oh, yeah.
learning exciting and sexy and everything. So it's just really interesting to now we kind of again like dive a little bit deeper sometimes in other content areas, but the big conversation, like you said, the elephant in the room, it's like a elephant sanctuary practically. There's so many of these elephants in the room that are like cheating and like you said plagiarism and the frustration that comes with that, which is not new, but it's going to keep evolving.
Yeah, it is. And I think that the more we can model how to use it for students,
Yeah.
again, perhaps I'm too optimistic, but
Right.
the better off we're going to be because if
Mhm.
they think of AI as just kind of like a fun thing they do on Snapchat that can do other things, then they're not going to
Yeah.
be able to use it effectively. Not to
Right.
knock
Well,
Snapchat, like that has its time and place too, but
yeah. Absolutely. And we have to, I hate to be that person that's like, and the relationships, because you know how that feels like when somebody, when a kid
no,
throws a desk at a wall or something and they're like, but Maureen, have you thought about a relationship? Like, but do you know? And you're like, I know how frustrating that is, but really like knowing when somebody's writing sounds like them is so
yeah,
powerful. And that is such a strength of world language teachers is
yeah,
we go, wow, this is really good. Like you said, with formative and feedback, like if we're giving feedback in a timely way as we should, and it's genuine and we're doing the best we can to keep up with all the
yeah,
things constantly, then we should know if all of a sudden they don't sound like them, or those very clear level ups that are like making a little joke in the language, just a little
right,
like ha 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 ha, or they reach and do a little kind of I+1 or like a
yeah.
circumlocution, and you're like, see what you did there? Like
I
that was
love
super cute, super
circumlocution.
fun.
It's the best.
Yeah, like a
Yeah.
robot's not going to do that, right? And the robot, like AI is not going to know that I taught you such and such word last Thursday through an embarrassing story and my face turned red. So now you're going to use that on the writing this Friday and be like ha 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 winky
Right.
face like on your you know what I mean? Like all those really sweet
Absolutely.
moments with students and teachers where it's just like that's not going to be like replicated. It can't be. But it's going to be obvious. So yeah, like how do we use it as a tool? How do we harness it? But maybe we're both optimistic and naive. I don't know.
No, no, and I completely understand what you're saying. And that's why I think AI will never replace teaching because
No.
so much of what we do is relationship building.
Yeah,
And I know, again, maybe it's super optimistic, but
I know.
that is so much a part of it because students
Mhm.
can't learn unless they feel like they're in a safe environment where they can grow and
Yeah.
kind of because you can't challenge students. They can't reach their zone of proximal development unless they're
Right.
feeling safe. And so the more we can create those relationships and we can
Yeah.
create that safe space for students, the better off they're going to be with learning. So we're exactly on the same page there.
I think so. Either we've both lost it or we're right.
I mean, it
Those are
could
the
be.
options. Those are the only. No, I agree. I think back to my own language learning experience with my Spanish teacher, who's the reason I became a Spanish teacher. And I never experienced anything but joy, and amusement. And, she was just, that was it. She was excited at any language I produced. It didn't matter, and AI can't do that. And AI shouldn't do that. It's just supposed to help us. It's not going to replace us, and it shouldn't be scary, but we also shouldn't ignore it. So there's some weird tension there that I don't quite know how to mitigate, but I think maybe it's different for all of us.
Yeah. And I say let's use it. Let's
Yeah,
use it
absolutely.
and realize what it can be used for, and
Yeah.
again, not be afraid of it. I think there are scary elements to it, but I think again, the Terminator's not coming. We can
Right.
use it though to help with lesson planning. So
Right.
let's use it and harness its power.
Arnold Schwarzenegger's like 70 now. So even if he did, even if he did, it's different. No, no, yeah, absolutely. I agree. There's like definitely a fear factor there. And I'm like, well, if you can't beat them, join them. Or if like you feel like you can't beat, well, get in there, and figure it out, and at least learn. It's like we do with student slang. We just like overhear something and we're like, noted, so like go drop in there, see what it does, and just see if you can use it. If all of it's terrible and you don't like it and you just don't see a use for it, great, but at least
Yeah. Oh my
Mhm.
God. You're so right though. With student
Mhm.
slang, it does feel like that sometimes. Like, are you using
Where you're
that word
like,
right? Is that bussin'? What's going
that's
on?
right, ooh, this really slaps, and they're like,
Exactly.
Senora, immediately no. And I'm like, what's the problem?
Right,
Don't
right.
I have Riz? They're like, no, God, no.
Yep.
Turns out, no.
Yeah.
Oh no. Yeah, no, I mean it does. It feels like it can feel kind of just unknown and kind of
Yeah.
scary. And but we've got, what have teachers done, tale as old as time, is we go, okay, and we dive in. If it's like a new initiative or a new LMS, we're like, oh, okay. But then we learn it anyway, and we do
I'm sure.
great. And I think world language teachers are the best at that anyway. We're innovative, or we're creative, we're fun. So we're
Yeah.
going to find uses for it.
'Cause we teach all
Absolutely.
the things. Yeah.
We
We
teach
teach
all,
we
we're
teach everything.
amazing.
So we need to be flexible. We need to be adapting all the time. So
Amen. Do they
that's the
know how
one
great
thing
we
we have
are?
to
They
adapt
don't.
to.
Right. We're good at everything. Gosh. Best content. Oh,
I
well,
think
Maureen, thank you. You're the best, and
so much
super,
for having me.
super
This is so much
appreciate your
fun.
time. Yay. I know. And I am going to like pour it back over these slides too, and make sure that because it's just, you introduced me to half of these tools are completely new to me. So I'm like,
Great.
ooh, yeah, I'm so excited. I cannot wait to dive in.
Have
So
fun.
thank you so much. And on behalf of Flag and the board and Klett, we are just so grateful for you. Thank you so much. And thanks guys for coming. I will post
Yeah.
the recording soon, and we'll be back soon. Yay.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Happy Thursday.